So today I'll be talking about Roots and Migrants, which is a story map application designed for teaching and learning historical population dynamics and U.S. history. Despite the growing popularity of story maps, the potential in history education, particularly for teaching the evolution of spatial phenomena over time, remains underexplored. So most existing story maps, for example, like ArcGIS story maps, is actually not designed for educational use. So because of this, teachers and students are rarely included in their development process. So to fix this issue, we actually implemented a user-centered design where we invited a few high school teachers and high school students to develop a story map application to support them in teaching and learning U.S. history. So the bigger problem is the fact that there is a gap between the technical skills and the pedagogical knowledge for integrating these tools, for example, maps, into the curriculum. We all know how underexplored maps are in teaching high school students. So for you to fix this issue, you have to use a user-centered approach where you invite all stakeholders. In this case, you invite the teachers and you invite the students, and you tell them how can we maximize your learning outcomes. So next So in our lab, we work on studying migration, and so the ultimate goal is to increase public scientific literacy in terms of U.S. history, demography, migration, and kinship networks. So we have a couple of papers out, we talk about how we geocode these networks, how we use family trees to understand migration patterns. So moving to the methodology, our user-centered design process is more like an iterative design process where we come together, we try to figure out what are the needs and the goals of the teachers and the students. So the needs of the teachers is to have a tool that can help them effectively teach historical population dynamics. And for the students, the main outcome would be to learn U.S. history or historical population dynamics. So that's what we do in the work domain analysis. We get these needs together, and then we develop our initial or very important requirements, which we do in the conceptual development phase. And so in the next phase, I go back to the drawing board. I take my HTML, I take my CSS, I take my JavaScript, and then I throw in some of these requirements in, and we actually develop the application. So this was done in 2 workshops. The first workshop, we basically told them, tell us what you need, and then we would build it. And so when we did that, they gave us a list of requirements, and then I worked on it. And then coming back for the second workshop, I told them, so this is the result of the first workshop. And they really liked it, and they said, how can we integrate this into our curriculum? So in the second stage, we had the second workshop where we had a lesson plan development, where we took Roots and Migrants, and then we told them, this is the application, how can you integrate this into your curriculum? So finally, we went to the evaluation stage, which we basically did a user-based, very informal evaluation where we tell them, does this address your needs, and what else can we do to improve the current version of this application? So going to the design, so we all know how cumbersome it could be to kind of gather data on U.S. history, and we all know that there is no absolute truth. And so we gathered a lot of public data, especially for authoritative sources such as NHGIS, Big Alliance, GeoPortal. We got our family tree data set from rootsweb.com, even though it's no longer active. They got rid of it. So we gathered this, and we processed all this data together, and we used that to develop Roots and Migrants. So for the migration data, we basically use family trees using the child ladder method to identify migration events. For example, if you are born in, let's say, New York, and then your sibling is born in, let's say, Philadelphia, then you obviously know there's a migration event. So that's how we come up with a map of net flow migration, and this is what we use to represent historical internal migration. So going into the first workshop, we basically asked them what do they need, what does the curriculum need in order to be able to teach U.S. history effectively. So we talked about how we could improve student engagement as well as the current tools. We know they make use of a lot of Google Earth, ArcGIS Pro, and even so, high school teachers do not necessarily have the skills to teach GIS effectively. So we also talked about the resource gaps and how Roots and Migrants can be used as a classroom support. How can we develop this application in a way that it's flexible? For example, differences between teaching a 6th grade and like a 9th grade. So how do we address these issues? And so we also asked how we could incorporate student feedback and support because they are the ultimate users, right? And so we try to just bring all this together to make an amazing application. So it's kind of pretty basic. We developed this with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Bootstrap. We also use MapLibre and D3, which also comes with like its limitations, but we just try to make it work. We also use ArcGIS Online Feature Server for the base maps and Caglar for like visualizing the cloudlet maps. So just to give you a random, a very brief explanation of how the application works, we have 5 major interfaces. The first one is the history interface, where you learn about state-specific histories or general histories. In this slide, we're talking about the Louisiana Purchase, where you can view the geographic extent of the Louisiana Purchase, as long as text and image, which you can also expand. You also have access to external resources, YouTube videos, everything all within the application. So next, in the history, you can also view specific events. For example, you can view the Indian Removal Act or the Missouri Compromise, and you can also see the associated text and interactive features. So next, you can also explore population density from 1790 all the way to about 1990. And you also have like an accompanying, because it's a story map, right? An accompanying text describing or trying to give explanations for the patterns you see. For example, the California Gold Rush, which was found in El Dorado County. And so if you zoom in, you would see that at the time, El Dorado County had a very high population. So that could like give them an idea of those events or those factors that influence the patterns. So next, we also have racial demographics, where you can teach or learn things about the Great Migration. For example, you see like the upward movement from for African Americans from the south to the north. So Roots and Migrants can also help us visualize with that. This is also the internal migration map I described earlier, which we developed using the family tree data set, and you can see kind of like the westward migration, where you have the red indicating population loss, and then you have the blue indicating a population gain. So same thing with this. This just shows the population, the migration net flow ratio over time. So we also have the international migration, where you can see where did people come from. For example, here you can see that in 1940, Germany was the top source, and so you can see this for like individual states, or you can see it for the whole, the country as a whole. So you can also support graphicacy by the use of graphs. If you are not feeling all spatial, you can always look at the graphs, and it also helps high school students to improve their statistical skills. So this is my favorite part of the application. I spent like almost 6 months on this. So it's basically a you compare two maps. In this case, you have the population density, and you have a map of native land. I'm sure a lot of us might be familiar with the map on the right. So you basically take this first map, you take the second map, and then you compare, for example. Well, you can't necessarily compare, but like you just see side by side, and you can also like zoom in and see, oh, where do you have, let's say, Illinois, and what is the native land like there looking like. So we tried as much as possible. I was talking to my friend here, and she says, oh, Alaska has been left out of a lot of things. And so I tried to include Alaska in all the maps, Alaska and Hawaii. So basically, this is one of the things that Roots Migrants is trying to address. And I think it's user-friendly, and it's currently designed for desktops, and if you try opening it on your mobile phones, it might be a little bit tricky, but yeah. So we went back for the second workshop, and then they came about 6 lesson plans. Here we have a lesson plan from Zachary, where we basically he took Roots and Migrant, and he's like, how can we teach US history with this? And so here he basically tells them, how do you analyze trends of migration? For example, migration from Mexico to Mexico and China to California, and like migration from Western Europe down to the United States. So this is basically what he came up with, and I think this was very impressive. It was nice to see the application put into good use. So the second lesson plan talks about the same thing, but she also included a graph, which we currently support on Roots and Migrants. So I think this is a very, very important thing to include. So you have the last one. The last one, where we also talk about inquiry-based learning, where they were prompted to create their own FRQs. So it basically supports different teachers and their ways of teaching, and I think that's one of the main reasons why we developed Roots and Migrants in the first place. So, for example, you have that they are teaching the population density, and they are asking the students to explain the patterns or the possible issues with the map in terms of like showing it on a state level or on a national level. So this also gave us the opportunity to see where we can develop the application more. So we had this lesson plan from a teacher where she was like, Roots and Migrants would be a very good application to use to teach this, but it currently does not support it in the way she would like. And so we thought, maybe this is a great opportunity to look at this lesson plan and see the kind of questions that teachers would like to teach. So this is the end. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So you mentioned the Roots web data that you got is no longer available. So what other sources would you suggest for looking at like generalized migration trends with a population? And do you think that this can also be done within a city or a state, or is this more of like a whole country pattern?
Yeah, definitely. We also work with linking in our lab. We work with linking census data with family tree data to understand the representativeness. So that's another way to look at it. We look at a lot of census data, especially from the census.gov, and we also look at EPOMS, which has a great variety of data sets. So aside that and family tree, I think that's our major source of information. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. That was one of the interest of the teachers. They said currently it's really limited to like state level or county levels. So we are trying to make it more adaptive, where you can like change granular in like few seconds, go from like state to local levels. But the issues with historical data is you can't really find all the levels like very consistently, and so we're just trying to find a way. So they're like, find the data somewhere, somehow, and we just don't want to pick up any random data off. So it's very difficult to find like authoritative data from like all levels or all scales of information.
So this looks really cool. What if we have nieces and nephews that we think should look at this? Is this for public consumption, or is this just for the specific schools that you're working with?
Oh, yeah. So it's actually for public consumption. It's still undergoing development process. So a lot of it is kind of tailored to like the teachers. For example, you have AP questions inbuilt into the application. But generally, I think it's general history, and it's also like good for public consumption. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Loretta. That was an excellent presentation. Give it up.